Greetings, fellow wanderer. If you grew up anywhere near Western culture, or spent time in a traditional church, you likely have a very specific image in your mind when you hear the name Satan or the devil. You probably picture a singular, powerful, and deeply personal antagonist, a fallen angel who commands a kingdom of darkness and wages a constant cosmic war against God and his people. When we read that understanding back into the earliest pages of the Bible, it feels seamless. But if you take a step back and walk through the text chronologically, something fascinating happens. The figure of the devil doesn't appear suddenly fully formed on page 1. Instead, what you find is a long, nuanced, and deeply human development across centuries. I want to be clear at the outset. Examining how an idea develops isn't about playing gotcha or taking a cynical view of the Bible. It's about honoring the text enough to meet it where it actually sits and watching how humanity's understanding of evil and the unseen world matured over time. If we begin in the Hebrew Scriptures, the word Satan isn't actually a proper name. It's a common noun that means adversary, accuser, or executioner. Take Numbers 22, for example. When Balaam is riding his donkey to go curse Israel, God sends a messenger to stop him. In verse 22, the text says the angel of the Lord stood in the road as a Satan, an adversary against Balaam. Here the Satan is not a demon. It is the holy angel of Yahweh fulfilling a divine function to block a foolish path. By the time we get to Zechariah chapter 3, we see Ha-Satan, literally the adversary, acting like a prosecutor in a heavenly courtroom, standing beside Joshua the high priest to level accusations against him before God. We see an even sharper shift when we compare two accounts of the same historical event. In 2 Samuel 24, written earlier, it is Yahweh himself who is angry with Israel and incites David to count the troops. But centuries later, when the author of 1 Chronicles 21 retells that exact story, the text reads that a Satan stood up against Israel and incited David. What was once attributed directly to the sovereign, mysterious will of God in early Israelite thought begins to be filtered through an intermediary agent. And then, of course, there is Job. In the opening chapters of Job, Ha-Satan appears among the sons of God in the divine council. He isn't a rival deity ruling hell. He's an official within God's administrative court, whose job is to roam the earth, punish evildoers, and newly in the Job narrative, test human fidelity. That's assuming that Ha-Satan belongs here in the original Job narrative. There are some scholars who have put forth a theory that Ha-Satan has been added to this passage, much like the Satan was added in 1 Chronicles. If you'd like to see if that theory works for you, here's a reading of Job supplied by Ryan Stokes, and I'd encourage you to try it. Read chapter 1 and 2 of Job, but try skipping chapter 1 verses 6 through 12 and chapter 2 verses 1 through 8. If you remove those specific heavenly council scenes, notice how the story of Job flows with seamless narrative coherence directly from his wealth into his earthly trial. Scholars often point to this to suggest that the heavenly Satan dialogue may have been added later to help a later audience wrestle with the immense problem of innocent suffering. Textual criticism aside, in all these Old Testament passages, the Satan remains ambiguous. Is he working for God or against God? He operates firmly within God's sovereign boundary, serving as an executioner, a prosecutor, or a divine adversary. So where does the cosmic enemy come from? To find that bridge, we have to look into the Intertestamental period, the centuries of supposed silence between the Old and New Testaments. During this era of foreign oppression, exile, and deep cultural trauma, Jewish thought wrestled intensely with cosmic evil. In the Book of the Watchers, found in 1 Enoch, writers expanded on the brief, cryptic mention of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, developing a detailed theology of fallen angels who rebelled and brought spiritual corruption to the earth. In the Book of Jubilees, we meet the Prince of Mastema, the head of evil spirits who petitions God to allow a portion of demonic spirits to remain under his command to tempt and test humanity. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, the world is framed in stark dualism, spiritual war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, led by a distinct cosmic antagonist often called Belial. When Jesus enters the Gospels, he speaks in a world that already understands this framework. In the New Testament, the ambiguity of the Old Testament is gone. Satan is no longer a prosecutor in God's counsel. He is the evil one, the ruler of this world, and an active enemy working directly against the kingdom of God with fallen spirits under his authority. The focus has completed its arc, from a functional, non-distinct agent under God to a personal, distinct antagonist opposing God. Now, many people wonder, what about the serpent in Genesis 3? Interestingly, the Hebrew text of Genesis never calls the serpent Satan or the devil. It describes a shrewd, earthly creature. It isn't until the New Testament that we see potential connections drawn. Passages like Romans 16:20, which read, "The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet," alluding to the Genesis prophecy, and Revelation 12:9 and Revelation 22, which explicitly call that ancient serpent the devil or Satan, make these allusions. Scholars still debate whether the biblical writers meant this as an explicit identification of the Edenic creature, or as a rich typological allusion linking all primal chaos and evil together under one theological umbrella. Similarly, famous passages like Isaiah 14, the morning star Lucifer, and Ezekiel 28, the king of Tyre, were originally poetic dirges addressed to earthly human kings. It was the early church fathers, thinkers like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and Origen, who helped to formalize and explicitly synthesize these texts, connecting them into a singular cohesive narrative of a glorious angel who fell through pride. Tracing this path doesn't diminish the gravity of the spiritual conversation. If anything, it shows us how deeply humanity has always sought to understand the presence of suffering and temptation in our world. As church historian Jeffrey Burton Russell so aptly put it, the history of concepts argues that a phenomenon such as the devil is best defined through its history. The devil is the tradition of what he has been thought to be. If you want to dive deeper into the historical and theological weight of this topic, I highly recommend two superb sources. The Satan, How God's Executioner Became the Enemy by Ryan E. Stokes, and Satan, the Early Christian Tradition by Jeffrey Burton Russell. I'd love to hear how these thoughts sit with your own reading and study. Leave a comment below, mind yourself, and keep on wandering.